The rain fell in heavy sheets over Arlington National Cemetery, drumming against the polished black umbrellas of the mourners gathered around the freshly dug grave. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the faint, lingering odor of gunpowder from the 21-gun salute that had echoed across the hills just moments before. Among the sea of somber faces stood General Marcus Holloway, a towering figure in his dress blues, his jaw set like granite as he stared at the casket draped in the American flag. The funeral was for Colonel Daniel Reyes, a decorated soldier who had served under Holloway in 3 tours overseas before an IED had claimed his life in a dusty village outside Kabul. Holloway had personally requested to speak at the service, his voice steady but laced with a quiet fury, as he recounted Reyes' bravery, his sacrifice, his loyalty. The crowd listened in respectful silence, but one man near the back shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on the grip of his service weapon. Detective Frank Kelton had no business being here. He wasn't family. He wasn't military. He wasn't even a friend. Kelton had come because he couldn't stand the idea of another public spectacle where a man like Holloway, a man who had spent his career sending young soldiers to die, was celebrated as a hero. Kelton had seen the news reports, the interviews, the way the media fawned over Holloway's distinguished service. But Kelton knew better. He had spent 20 years on the force in one of the toughest precincts in the city, and he had seen what men like Holloway really were. As the service concluded, and the crowd began to disperse, Kelton lingered, his eyes locked on Holloway. The general was shaking hands, accepting condolences, his face a mask of stoic grief. Kelton's fingers twitched. He had carried his resentment for years, ever since his own brother had come back from Holloway's unit in a body bag. His death ruled friendly fire in a report that had been buried faster than his corpse. Kelton wasn't here to mourn. He was here to send a message. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Holloway stepped away from the crowd, walking toward the line of black SUVs, waiting to escort him back to the Pentagon. Kelton moved quickly, cutting through the rows of headstones until he was just a few feet behind the general. "Holloway!" Kelton called out, his voice sharp enough to make the general stop and turn. Holloway's eyes narrowed as he took in the detective's rumpled suit, the sneer on his face, the way his hand hovered near his hip. "Can I help you, officer? You don't recognize me, do you?" Kelton took a step closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "My brother was Jason Kelton, 3rd Battalion, under your command in '09. Holloway's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes: recognition, maybe even guilt. "Jason was a good soldier. I'm sorry for your loss." Kelton's lip curled. "Sorry? You're sorry? You got him killed, and then you covered it up." Holloway's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you've been told, but I've seen the reports," Kelton snapped. "I know what you did." The general sighed, as if he'd had this conversation too many times before. "This isn't the place. If you want to talk, we can arrange a meeting." "No," Kelton said, his hand moving to his holster. "We're doing this now." Holloway's bodyguards, broad-shouldered men in dark suits, reacted instantly, stepping forward, but Kelton was faster. In one fluid motion, he drew his Glock and leveled it at Holloway's chest. The cemetery erupted into chaos. Gasps rang out as mourners scrambled back. The bodyguards froze, their own weapons half drawn, eyes darting between Kelton and Holloway. The general, however, didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, his gaze locked on Kelton's. "Put the gun down, detective," Holloway said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You don't want to do this." Kelton's finger hovered over the trigger. "You don't get to tell me what I want." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the distant roll of thunder and the rapid breathing of the onlookers. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice shouted, "He's a cop!" Kelton's grip tightened. He had come here to make Holloway pay, to force him to admit what he'd done. But now, with the gun in his hand and the weight of 100 eyes on him, he realized something terrible. He had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. And then, the first shot rang out. Kelton didn't fire. He didn't even see who did. But suddenly, Holloway was on the ground, blood spreading across his chest, and the world exploded into screams and gunfire. Kelton barely had time to register what had happened before he was tackled from behind, his face slamming into the wet grass as cuffs snapped around his wrists. You're under arrest, a voice barked in his ear. As he was dragged to his feet, Kelton caught one last glimpse of Holloway alive, bleeding, but very much alive, being loaded into a waiting ambulance. And then the realization hit him like a bullet. He had just pointed a gun at a military general in front of dozens of witnesses. He was going to prison for the rest of his life. The holding cell stank of sweat and disinfectant, a nauseating combination that made Frank Kelton's stomach churn. His wrists were raw from the cuffs, his suit jacket long gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that clung to his damp skin. He had been processed, photographed, and thrown into this concrete box like a common criminal. The irony wasn't lost on him, 20 years on the force, and now he was on the other side of the bars. The door clanged open, and a uniformed officer stepped inside, his face unreadable. "Kelton, you've got visitors." Kelton didn't move. "Who?" "Your lawyer. And the feds." The officer didn't bother waiting for a response, just motioned for him to follow. Kelton dragged himself up, his muscles stiff from hours of sitting, and shuffled down the fluorescent-lit hallway. The interrogation room they led him to was small, with a metal table bolted to the floor and a two-way mirror taking up half of one wall. His lawyer, a harried-looking man named Richard Voss, was already seated, flipping through a file. Across from him sat two men in dark suits, FBI, no doubt. Kelton dropped into the chair beside Voss. "So, how bad is it?" Voss didn't look up. "Bad." One of the feds, a square-jawed agent with cold eyes, leaned forward. "Detective Kelton, I'm Agent Harris. This is Agent Ruiz. We're here to discuss the incident at Arlington." Kelton snorted. "Incident? That's what we're calling it now?" Harris ignored the jab. "You pulled a firearm on a United States general during a military funeral, in front of dozens of witnesses, including high-ranking officials and members of the press. Do you understand the severity of that?" "I didn't shoot him," Kelton said flatly. "No," Ruiz cut in, his voice sharp. "But someone did. And right now, you're the only suspect." Kelton's head snapped up. "What?" Voss finally looked at him, his expression grim. "General Holloway was hit by a bullet during the altercation. The media is already calling it an assassination attempt." "That's bullshit," Kelton spat. "I didn't fire. I never even took the safety off." Harris slid a photograph across the tableau crime scene image of Kelton's Glock, tagged as evidence. "Your gun was discharged, Kelton. Ballistics confirms the bullet that grazed Holloway's shoulder came from your weapon." Kelton's blood ran cold. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Ruiz asked. "You had motive, you had opportunity, and now we have forensic evidence." Voss cleared his throat. "My client maintains his innocence. If his weapon was fired, it wasn't by him." Harris smirked. "Then who? One of the general's own men?" Kelton's mind raced. He had drawn his gun. Yes, but he hadn't fired. He was sure of it. Which meant someone else had someone who had used the chaos to take a shot at Holloway and pin it on him. "This is a setup," Kelton muttered. Harris leaned back, folding his arms. "That's a bold claim, Detective. Got any proof?" Before Kelton could respond, the door opened again, and a third agent stepped inside, whispering something to Harris. The lead agent's expression darkened. He stood abruptly. "We're done here." Ruiz followed suit, but not before tossing a final barb over his shoulder. "Enjoy prison, Kelton. I hear they love cops in there." The door slammed shut, leaving Kelton alone with Voss. The lawyer exhaled heavily. "Frank, you need to tell me everything. Right now." Kelton rubbed his face, his fingers trembling. "I didn't shoot him, Rich, I swear." "Then who did?" "I don't know," Kelton admitted. "But Holloway has enemies. Powerful ones." Voss frowned. "You think this was about him? Not you?" Kelton's laugh was hollow. "I'm just the fall guy." For the first time, Voss looked uncertain. "If that's true, proving it won't be easy. The feds want this wrapped up fast. They're pushing for federal charges. Attempted assassination of a military official carries a mandatory life sentence." Kelton's stomach twisted. Life in prison. For something he didn't do. "There's more," Voss added quietly. "The media got hold of your personnel file. They're painting you as a racist cop with a vendetta against minorities. Holloway's Mexican-American, Frank. This is a powder keg." Kelton's head shot up. "That's not what this was about." Doesn't matter, Voss said. The narrative's already set. You're the racist cop who tried to kill a war hero. Kelton slumped back in his chair, the weight of it all crushing him. He had wanted Holloway to answer for what he'd done, but not like this. Never like this. What do we do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Voss hesitated. We fight. But you need to understand, this isn't just a legal battle. It's political. And right now, you're on the wrong side of it. Kelton closed his eyes. He had walked into that cemetery with a gun and a grudge, thinking he was in control. But he had been played. And now, he was going to pay for it. The courtroom was packed. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. Cameras flashed, and the low hum of whispered speculation filled the air. Frank Kelton sat at the defense table, his hands cuffed in front of him, the orange jumpsuit replaced by a cheap suit Voss had scrounged up for the arraignment. It didn't fit. Nothing fit anymore. At the prosecution's table, Assistant U.S. Attorney Diane Carter adjusted her glasses and shuffled through her notes. She was polished, poised, the kind of lawyer who had never lost a high-profile case. And this one, Kelton knew, was as high-profile as they came. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver hair and a voice like a gavel, called the court to order. United States versus Frank Kelton. The defendant is charged with attempted assassination of a military official, unlawful discharge of a firearm on federal property, and assault with a deadly weapon. How does the defendant plead? Voss stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Carter barely reacted, already rising to her feet. Your Honor, given the severity of the charges and the defendant's history, the government requests he be held without bail pending trial. Voss was ready. Your Honor, my client is a decorated detective with no prior criminal record. He poses no flight risk. Carter's smile was razor-thin. Detective Kelton drew a weapon on a 4-star general in front of dozens of witnesses. He has demonstrated a clear disregard for the law he once swore to uphold. The judge's gaze flicked to Kelton. Bail is denied. Next hearing in 2 weeks. The gavel cracked. Just like that, it was over. As the marshals led him out of the courtroom, Kelton caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Sergeant Liam Cole, his old partner from the precinct. Cole's expression was unreadable, but his eyes locked onto Kelton's for a brief charged moment before he turned and disappeared into the throng of reporters. Back in his cell, Kelton replayed the hearing in his head. It had been a formality, a show. The real battle hadn't even started yet. Voss visited him that evening. His tie loosened, his face drawn. We've got problems. Kelton didn't look up. What now? The prosecution has a witness. Someone who says you've made threats against Holloway before. Kelton's head snapped up. Who? Voss hesitated. Cole. Kelton's blood turned to ice. Cole, his partner. The man he'd trusted with his life more times than he could count. He's lying, Kelton growled. Doesn't matter, Voss said. What matters is what the jury will believe. And a fellow cop testifying against you? That's devastating. Kelton clenched his fists. Cole had been there the night Kelton's brother died. He'd seen the fallout, the way Kelton had spiraled. He knew everything. And now he was selling him out. There's more, Voss continued. The feds are digging into your past. Any questionable arrests, any complaints, they're going to use it to paint you as unstable, violent. Kelton exhaled sharply. Every cop had skeletons. He was no exception. We need a countermove, Voss said. Something to shift the narrative. Kelton stared at the concrete floor. What if we prove Holloway's dirty? Voss frowned. Even if we could, how does that help you? You still pulled a gun on him. Because if Holloway's the kind of man who gets people killed and covers it up, Kelton said slowly, then maybe a jury would understand why I did what I did. Voss rubbed his temples. That's a long shot, Frank. It's all we've got. The next morning, Kelton was roused early for a meeting with an unexpected visitor, General Holloway himself. The general looked older in person, his face lined with pain, his left arm in a sling. He sat across from Kelton in a private visitation room, his bodyguards lingering by the door. You look like hell, Holloway said. Kelton didn't smile. What do you want? Holloway leaned forward. I know you didn't shoot me, Kelton went very still. The bullet that hit me? Holloway continued. It came from behind you. The trajectory's all wrong for it to have been your gun. Kelton's pulse pounded. Then why am I still here? Holloway's expression darkened. Because someone wants you to take the fall, and someone else wants me dead. And right now, those two things are connected. Kelton studied him. You think this is about you? I know it is. Holloway lowered his voice. I've spent my career making enemies, Kelton. Powerful ones. And now, they're using you to get to me. Kelton exhaled. So what? You expect me to help you? Holloway's gaze was steady. I expect you to help yourself. Because if we don't find out who really took that shot, you're going to prison for the rest of your life. The door opened, and a guard stepped in. Time's up. Holloway stood, wincing slightly as he adjusted his sling. Think about it. As he left, Kelton stared after him, his mind racing. Holloway was right. This wasn't just about him. And if he didn't figure out the truth soon, he'd never see the outside of a cell again. The prison library was a dim, windowless room with flickering fluorescent lights and the stale scent of old paper. Kelton sat at a chipped wooden table, a stack of newspapers and legal files spread out in front of him. Holloway's words had burrowed into his brain like a bullet. Someone wants you to take the fall, and now he was digging. Voss had managed to get him limited access to case materials, but the real goldmine had come from an unexpected source. Holloway's own files, smuggled in by one of his aides during a second secret visit. The general wasn't just offering help, he was handing Kelton the ammunition to fight back. Kelton flipped through a dossier marked Operation Iron Shield, his fingers tightening around the pages. It was a classified after-action report from Holloway's last tour in Afghanistan, detailing a botched raid that had left 12 civilians dead. The official story had called it collateral damage. The truth, buried in redacted paragraphs and coded memos, was far uglier. The door creaked open. Kelton didn't look up until a shadow fell across the table. Sergeant Liam Cole stood there, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. Kelton's pulse spiked. You've got nerve showing your face here. Cole pulled out a chair and sat. We need to talk about how you're testifying against me. Kelton's voice was a low snarl. Or about how you're lying. Cole leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have a choice. Kelton scoffed. Bullshit. Listen to me. Cole's eyes darted to the security camera in the corner. They came to me before the funeral. Said they had evidence you were planning to confront Holloway. They knew, Frank. They knew you'd be there, and they knew what you'd do. Kelton went very still. Who's they? Cole's jaw tightened. People with enough pull to make my life hell if I didn't play along. They wanted you as the fall guy, and they wanted Holloway dead. Kelton's mind raced. This wasn't just about him or Holloway. This was about something bigger. Why? Cole hesitated, then slid a folded note across the table. Because of this. Kelton opened it. A single name was scrawled in block letters. Admiral Greer. Kelton frowned. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs? Cole nodded. Holloway was about to testify before Congress next week. Greer's been funneling Black Ops funds into private contractors for years. Holloway found out. He was going to burn it all down. Kelton's blood ran cold. So Greer set me up to take the heat while his people took the shot. Cole stood abruptly. I've said too much already. Watch your back, Frank. They're not done with you. He left as quietly as he'd arrived. Kelton stared at the name on the paper. Greer. A 4-star admiral. A man with the resources to orchestrate a cover-up this elaborate. And now, Kelton had proof. The next day, Holloway's aide returned. This time, with a burner phone, hidden in a legal binder. The general's orders, the aide muttered. Use it once, then destroy it. Kelton waited until he was alone in his cell before dialing the only number programmed into it. Holloway answered on the first ring. You read the files? Yeah, Kelton said. And I met with Cole. A pause. What did he say? Enough to know we're both pawns. Kelton gripped the phone tighter. Greer's behind this. Holloway exhaled sharply. I was afraid of that. You knew? Suspected? Holloway corrected. But suspicion doesn't win Warser trials. We need hard evidence. Kelton glanced at the dossier on his cot. I've got some, But it's not enough. Then we get more. Holloway's voice hardened. There's a safe house in Alexandria. Files, recordings, everything I've gathered on Greer's operation. Problem is, it's under surveillance. Kelton barked a laugh. And you want me to get it? I'm in jail, General. Not for long. Holloway paused. Your bail hearing's tomorrow. I've called in favors. You'll be out by noon. Kelton's stomach twisted. This was insanity. But it was also his only shot. What's the address? Holloway relayed it, then added, one more thing. The aide who brought you the phone? He's your ride. Trust him. The line went dead. Kelton stared at the phone, then crushed it under his boot. Tomorrow, he'd walk out of here, and then the real fight would begin. The bail hearing was a circus. Voss argued passionately about Kelton's service record, his ties to the community, his complete lack of flight risk. The prosecution countered with grainy cell phone footage of Kelton pointing his gun at Holloway, spliced with sound bites from Cole about Kelton's history of racially charged outbursts. But then, shockingly, the judge ruled in their favor. Bail is set at $1 million, she announced. Defendant is to surrender his passport and wear an ankle monitor. As the courtroom erupted, Kelton caught sight of a familiar face in the back Holloway's aide, giving him an almost imperceptible nod. Favors, indeed. 2 hours later, Kelton stepped out into the blinding sunlight. A free man at least temporarily. The aide waited by a nondescript sedan. Engine running. Kelton slid into the passenger seat. Alexandria. The aide nodded. We're being watched. Keep your head down. As they pulled away, Kelton spotted the black SUV tailing them 3 cars back. He smiled grimly. Let them follow. By the time they realized where he was really going, it would be too late. The safe house in Alexandria was a nondescript brownstone, the kind of place that blended into the neighborhood. Kelton kept his head low as Holloway's aide parked 2 blocks away. The black SUV had stopped tailing them after a series of sharp turns, but he knew they'd regroup soon. You've got 15 minutes, the aide said, handing Kelton a keycard. Alarms are disabled, but the place might still be watched. Kelton nodded and stepped out, moving quickly down the sidewalk. His ankle monitor itched, but Voss had assured him the GPS had a slight delay, just enough time to do what he needed. The keycard slid into the lock without a sound. Inside, the house was dark, the air thick with dust. Kelton moved through the living room, his eyes scanning for cameras. A bookshelf against the far wall looked out of place too new for the aging house. He pulled at the edge, and it swung open with a soft click. Behind it was a steel door with a biometric scanner. Kelton hesitated. Holloway hadn't mentioned this. He pressed his palm against the screen anyway. To his surprise, it beeped green. The door hissed open, revealing a small office lined with monitors and file cabinets. At the center of the room was a locked briefcase. Kelton grabbed it, but the latches didn't budge. A 6-digit keypad glowed faintly on the side. He tried Holloway's birth date. No luck. Then his brother's SEAG. The case popped open. Inside was a single flash drive and a handwritten note. Play this in front of the right people. Then run. Kelton pocketed both and turned to leave, just as the front door burst open. 3 armed men in tactical gear stormed in, weapons raised. Kelton ducked behind the desk as bullets tore into the wall above him. He wasn't getting out the front. The window. He lunged, crashing through the glass, just as another volley of gunfire shattered the room behind him. He hit the ground hard, rolled, and sprinted down the alley. Shouts echoed behind him, but he didn't look back. Holloway's aide was gone when he reached the car. Of course, Kelton flagged down a passing cab. Union Station. Fast. The train to New York was half empty. Kelton sat in the back, his hands shaking as he plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The file that opened was a single video. Admiral Greer's face filled the screen. Iron Shield was a mistake, Greer said, his voice low. Holloway's digging will expose everything. The money, the contractors, the bodies. If he testifies, we're finished. Another voice, off camera. What do you want done? Greer didn't hesitate. Make it look like Kelton. The detective's already a loose cannon. No one will question it. The video ended. Kelton exhaled. This was it, the proof. But he needed to get it to someone who couldn't be silenced. He pulled out his phone and dialed the only reporter he trusted, Lisa Reyes, an investigative journalist who had spent years exposing government corruption. She answered on the second ring. "Frank, you're supposed to be in custody." "Not anymore," he said. "I'm sending you something. Play it live. Don't trust anyone until you do." A pause. "This about Holloway?" "It's about all of them." He hung up before she could ask more. The video aired that night on primetime news. By morning, Greer was in custody. Cole had recanted his testimony, and Holloway was on every major network, demanding a full investigation into Iron Shield. Kelton turned himself in shortly after. The charges against him were dropped within a week. 6 months later, Kelton stood outside the courthouse, squinting in the sunlight. The trials were over. Greer was serving life in a maximum security prison. Holloway had retired, his reputation restored. Lisa Reyes walked up beside him, holding out a coffee. "You looked like hell." Kelton took it. "Feel like it too," she smirked. "What now?" He sipped the coffee, watching as a group of protesters marched down the street, their signs demanding justice for the victims of Iron Shield. "Now?" He shrugged. "I keep going." And for the first time in years, he meant it.